During the Vietnam War, the American public was fed a narrative crafted in Washington, not in the jungles of Southeast Asia. The media echoed official optimism, masking the brutal reality and creating a dangerous information gap. This misplaced trust allowed misinformation to shape national consensus, leaving the public blind to the war's true cost. Only as the war dragged on did courageous journalists and mounting casualties begin to expose the truth behind the carefully constructed facade. In the early years of the Vietnam War, the U.S. media played a pivotal role in shaping public perception, but not always in a critical way. Most journalists and news organizations accepted the government's explanations and justifications for involvement in Vietnam, rarely challenging official statements or seeking alternative viewpoints. This era was marked by a sense of trust in authority, with reporters often viewing themselves as partners in the national interest rather than independent investigators. The Gulf of Tonkin incident in August 1964 became a turning point. When reports emerged of North Vietnamese attacks on U.S. ships, the media quickly echoed the government's version of events. Headlines blared the official story, and television broadcasts repeated the administration's claims with little skepticism. In reality, the incident was far more ambiguous, with evidence later revealing that the attacks were exaggerated or even fabricated. Yet, at the time, the press coverage helped justify a dramatic escalation of U.S. military involvement in Vietnam. Major outlets like the New York Times and the Washington Post, considered the gold standard of American journalism, largely repeated the administration's narrative. Editorial meetings focused on relaying official briefings rather than questioning their accuracy. Few reporters traveled to Vietnam in the early years, and those who did often relied on military sources for information, further reinforcing the government's perspective. The press, seeing itself as a supporter of national interest during the Cold War, tended to ignore Vietnam's complex colonial history and the local perspectives of the Vietnamese people. Instead, coverage reduced the conflict to a simple battle between communism and democracy, fitting it neatly into the broader Cold War narrative. This oversimplification left little room for nuance or dissenting voices. As a result, the American public received a filtered and often misleading version of events. Families gathered around their televisions or read the morning paper, trusting that they were getting the full story. But the lack of scrutiny and critical reporting left citizens misinformed, unable to grasp the true complexity and cost of the conflict. This set the stage for what would become known as the credibility gap between the government and the people. The media's early failure to question authority would have lasting consequences. As the war dragged on and its grim realities became impossible to ignore, journalists began to challenge official accounts, and public trust in both the government and the press began to erode. The legacy of early media compliance would haunt coverage for years to come, shaping how future conflicts were reported and remembered. Vietnam is often called the first television war, but this is misleading. Most TV coverage showed aftermaths, not live combat, and was delayed, edited, and sanitized. Reports focused on American soldiers and technology, rarely showing the suffering of Vietnamese civilians. Early TV coverage actually increased public support for the war, reinforcing official narratives. The so-called living room war was more a filtered reflection than a window into reality. Only when the gap between optimistic broadcasts and mounting casualties grew too wide did public skepticism rise. The myth that TV coverage alone turned America against the war oversimplifies a much more complex story. Before 1965, fewer than 24 American journalists covered Vietnam, working in a country that was still largely unknown to the American public. These early correspondents operated with limited resources, often relying on intuition and local contacts to piece together the story of a conflict that was just beginning to draw international attention. Their reports were some of the first glimpses Americans had into the realities of a distant and complex war. These journalists often clashed with official U.S. narratives, challenging military spokesmen at press conferences and pushing for answers that went beyond the carefully crafted statements. Their skepticism was met with resistance, but it also set the tone for a new era of war reporting, one defined by a search for truth rather than simple repetition of government lines. As the number of American troops in Vietnam swelled, so did the press corps. By 1968, the landscape had changed dramatically, with hundreds of reporters from around the world arriving to cover the conflict. The war became one of the most heavily reported in history, with journalists from major newspapers, television networks, and wire services all vying to capture the unfolding drama. The streets of Saigon and the jungles of the countryside were now filled with correspondents, each seeking their own angle on the war. Press centers buzzed with activity as stories were filed and rumors circulated, creating a vibrant, if chaotic, media environment. The military's open access policy allowed journalists to accompany soldiers into the field, ride along in helicopters, and witness combat operations up close. This unprecedented level of access let them see the war as it happened, not just as it was described in official briefings. Their stories gained a new immediacy and authenticity, as they could now report what they saw with their own eyes, sometimes at great personal risk. The images and accounts they sent back home brought the war into American living rooms in a way that had never been done before. But this access was a double-edged sword. Journalists found themselves in harm's way, facing the same dangers as the soldiers they covered. The front lines were unpredictable, and the risks were real. Their reporting produced both heroic tales of valor and sacrifice, highlighting moments of courage under fire that inspired readers and viewers back home. But they also delivered unvarnished reports of failure, tragedy, and contradiction, stories that revealed the darker side of the conflict, from destroyed villages to the suffering of both soldiers and civilians. Many reporters developed their own sources, venturing beyond official briefings to speak with Vietnamese civilians, local officials, and soldiers on all sides. This independent reporting allowed them to uncover stories that would otherwise have remained hidden. In makeshift newsrooms, journalists pieced together the complexities of the war, debating their findings and striving to make sense of a conflict that defied easy explanation. Their investigations revealed the immense challenges of fighting a guerrilla insurgency, where the enemy was often invisible and the front lines blurred. Through interviews and candid moments, they captured the growing disillusionment among American troops, many of whom began to question the purpose and progress of the war. This shift in reporting was crucial. By breaking the government's monopoly on information, journalists on the ground helped the American public see the Vietnam War in all its complexity, shaping public opinion and ultimately the course of history. Covering Vietnam was perilous. Over 60 journalists were killed or went missing, including many Vietnamese reporters. Reporters faced the same dangers as soldiers, with no clear front lines and constant threats. The psychological toll was immense. Journalists witnessed daily violence and moral ambiguity. Michael Herr's dispatches captured the surreal trauma of the experience. This exposure bred empathy for soldiers and skepticism toward official statements. First-hand reporting challenged sanitized narratives, showing the war's chaos and tragedy. The courage of these journalists was vital in revealing the war's true face. Walter Cronkite, the trusted face of CBS News, initially echoed the mainstream consensus on Vietnam. The Tet Offensive in 1968 shattered his certainty. After witnessing the aftermath, Cronkite concluded the war was unwinnable. In a landmark broadcast, he called for negotiation, not victory, a seismic shift for American viewers. President Johnson reportedly said, "If I've lost Cronkite, I've lost Middle America." Cronkite's critique was pragmatic, not moral, but it signaled a turning point in public trust. His break with the government gave millions permission to doubt the official story. This moment marked the media's growing independence from government narratives. Some of the war's darkest truths emerged thanks to independent journalists like Seymour Hersh. Hersh uncovered the My Lai massacre, a war crime hidden for over a year by the U.S. military. Major outlets hesitated, so Hersh published through a small news service. Graphic photos soon forced the story into the mainstream. My Lai shattered the myth of American moral superiority and exposed the failure of mainstream media to investigate. Hersh's Pulitzer-winning work proved the necessity of adversarial investigative journalism. The exposé showed that the most vital stories are often those powerful institutions try hardest to conceal. Contrary to myth, the media did not turn the public against the war. It followed a shift already underway. Early coverage was supportive, but by 1968, public opinion had soured. Nearly half of Americans called the war a mistake. Editorial boards lagged behind, slow to break with official policy. The real drivers of disillusionment were mounting casualties and the credibility gap between government claims and reality. Journalists like Cronkite voiced conclusions millions had already reached. The media's critical turn was a reflection, not a cause of America's change of heart. Vietnam War journalism failed to convey the true human cost, especially the suffering of Vietnamese civilians. The images and stories that did make it to the Western audience were often sanitized, stripped of the raw, brutal reality that these people faced daily. The media's portrayal was limited, focusing more on the geopolitical chess game rather than the individual lives shattered by the conflict. The focus remained on American soldiers and strategy, relegating Vietnamese voices to the background. This skewed perspective created a narrative where the Vietnamese were mere shadows in their own land, their stories untold, and their pain unseen. The American public was shielded from the full extent of the war's brutality. The scale of death and destruction was too vast for nightly news to capture, making suffering seem abstract. The bombings, the razed villages, the countless lives uprooted, these were reduced to fleeting images, devoid of context and depth. The human cost was lost in the noise of war statistics and political rhetoric. This America-centric lens distorted public memory, ignoring the devastation inflicted on Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. The war's impact on these countries was profound, leaving scars that would last generations. Yet the narrative remained focused on American experiences, sidelining the immense suffering endured by Southeast Asian communities. Honest reporting must bear witness to the human cost and hold power accountable. Journalists have a duty to go beyond the surface, to dig deeper and bring to light the stories that matter. They must challenge the dominant narratives and give voice to the voiceless, ensuring that the true impact of war is not forgotten. The untold stories of Vietnam remind us that failing to see others' humanity is a failure of journalism and conscience. These stories are a stark reminder of the consequences of neglecting the human aspect of conflict. They urge us to reflect on our responsibilities as consumers of news and as global citizens. To ensure these stories are told, follow our work and subscribe for more in-depth reports. By supporting independent journalism, you help keep these crucial narratives alive, fostering a more informed and empathetic world.